Hey, Pete Gardner, how you doing?
Hey Glenn, this has been a long time coming, my friend.
Yeah, it has. It has. It has. Um, you're kind of quarantined in England right now, right?
Yeah, that's right. Obviously, my family are back in Northern Ireland. I'm living in
Hmm.
Kent, in
Hmm.
southeast of England at the moment. So yeah, I've been here for a little while.
Wow. Wow. And is your sister stuck in England too, or is she in Ireland?
She's no, actually, she joined the RAF, the Royal Air Force, here
Oh, wow.
about 2 years ago, and yeah, she is based in England.
Hmm.
She's based in a place called High Wycombe in England, but because of the COVID situation, she was actually sent home last November to work from home. So she's actually been in northern. She's stuck in Northern Ireland at the moment, and
Oh,
she's
wow.
waiting to get back to England. So we're in completely opposite situations. I'm sort of been here for nearly a year, trying to get back home to see my family, and
Hmm.
she's been with my mom and dad since November, and she's probably going to be coming back to her job in May or June time.
Wow. I mean, that's
Yeah,
crazy. You know,
so
it,
we'll
it
be doing a little bit of a trade off.
yeah, it's is Brexit having anything to do with that as well, or
No. This is
no?
just purely COVID.
Purely COVID?
COVID's yeah,
Yeah. I don't
yeah,
really want to talk about Brexit because honestly, I don't think
yeah.
anybody
Me
outside
neither.
of I
To
don't
be
think any,
honest, sorry. Go ahead,
I
man.
was going to say I don't think that anybody outside of the UK actually really understands what's going on, and I'm not sure anyone in the UK actually understands what's going on. So, um,
No, no. There's a line that I wrote in a song a couple of years ago. I wrote a song called "Pick Your Side,"
hmm.
and one of the lines in it is, "The will of the people is an equation Goodwill Hunting died while trying to solve." And
Yeah,
I think that's
love it.
pretty. It still holds to this day.
Yeah,
Nobody has a clue what's going on with that, and to be honest, nobody really cares. Ever since COVID hit, it was sort of like Game of Thrones, where everybody's fighting amongst themselves, and then the White
hmm.
Walkers start coming in.
Hmm.
COVID's like the White Walkers sort of marching towards the wall, and
Yeah,
everybody forgot about their own little squabbles. So everybody was nobody talked about Brexit for the whole of last year that I can remember.
yeah. No, it did completely fall off the news cycle. Even in the States.
Yeah,
Um,
the one good thing to come out of COVID was the fact that I didn't have to listen to Brexit talk for a few months.
no, again, we said we're not going to talk about this, but I just saw a news report this morning, I think it was, that um, there's been 100 billion euros transferred out of London exchanges back into Ireland in the last like 24 hours. Now that's a lot of
Right.
money, right? And I think
Yeah.
people didn't really think this all the way through, right? It's like,
No, no,
okay,
no.
you know, um, and the people I feel really sad for actually are people who like I believe you call them pensioners in the UK, but retirees is what we would call them here, who have
Yeah.
like moved to like Mallorca or whatever, and suddenly they're in this weird legal limbo, right? So I
Yeah.
do feel sorry for those people that kind of that are caught in the crossfire.
Yeah.
Um, but let's segue off into something a little more exciting. Um,
Yeah. Definitely.
when I first met you, and we're gonna talk about that story because that was a lot of fun. Um,
Yeah. Let's set the scene.
yeah, um, I all I heard when I first met you was, you're a musician, and then you said singer-songwriter, and I was like, oh fuck, okay, great, like another one of these people that
Well,
I have to
need
deal
another.
with.
Like we need another one. Yeah.
Right, exactly. It was like, okay, fuck this. And since it was at your show was at what the Troubadour? It was the Troubadour, right?
Uh, mm, the Viper Room, I
The
think. Oh
Viper
no,
Room. That's
no. Oh,
it was.
Jesus, I
It was.
remember it was either. I think it was the Viper. Yeah, no, it was the Viper Room because I remember doing a Facebook post about the Viper Room the day I was supposed to play there, and it was. I remember talking about River Phoenix when I was
Oh,
doing the
okay,
post, so
okay,
it must have been the Viper Room. Yeah.
yeah. But because it was the Viper Room, I was like, oh god, he's gonna be one of those weird um quasi hair metally sort of but singer songwriter guys, and I was picturing something like I don't know, like a Brett
Yeah,
Michaels or
yeah.
something terrible like that. Um, and then when I actually heard what you were doing, I was like, well, this is really really interesting. right? I mean, because it's Americana, right? I mean, a lot of what you do is what would be considered Americana, but you're obviously not American. Um,
Yeah,
and there's just enough of the mixing of some of the more traditional Irish sort of sounds in there as well. Like I was just
yeah.
listening to the Christmas song. I just forgot the name of it.
Oh,
Um,
the Christmas.
it's nice outside, or it was gross outside, but now it's nice for Christmas, or something like that.
It rained all night, but it cleared up for Christmas
That's
morning.
right. That's right. Yeah. Um, and
Of
listening
all
to that.
the songs, of all the songs you could have chosen to talk about, you picked my Christmas one,
And well,
Glenn. That's
the
that's
reason the
nice.
reason I picked it is because it's a really interesting song because it's very Americana, kind of traditional sort of Americana, and then
Yeah.
all of a sudden, the Irish fiddles come in, and then there's like then there's horns in it, so it's like it's this weird mixture of styles, to me, um,
Yeah.
and that's why I brought that song up because it kind of I think it covers a lot of ground in as far as your repertoire goes, right? I mean, it
Yeah,
was
it was a really fun song to write, because up until then, I think I'd spent the whole year prior to writing that song, I was writing an album, that's actually not available at the moment. It used to be available on Spotify, but it's not anyway. It was called Six String Love Stories, and I spent a lot of time writing that album, and it was a really serious collection of songs, and I spent a lot of time scrutinizing over every single lyric and every single line to make sure all the syllables were perfect and to make sure all the lines were up to the standard that I'd set for myself. And when I came around to it was a couple of months before Christmas, it I'd always wanted to write a really uplifting, fun Christmas song, and
mhm,
when it came time to write that song, it was just lovely, um, just to let loose and just not give a damn and just write something that was unapologetically
mhm,
happy and joyful.
right.
Um, I my family and we have this tradition where every Christmas Eve or one of the days leading up to Christmas, we watch the musical version of A Christmas Carol,
Hmm.
starring Albert Finney. And the last 10 minutes of that film, where Ebenezer Scrooge figures out, the error of his ways, and he goes absolutely ballistic, running around town, giving toys to kids and doubling doubling Bob Cratchit's salary. That there's something about that scene, I think, that inspired the song. It was just something that I wanted to be really, really just sort of uplifting and joyful, and it was just such a relief to write a song like that after spending so much time trying to be the next Leonard Cohen, you know.
Right. No, I love that. I love that. And um, some of your fellow Irish, of course, have to me like the perfect Christmas song, and that's Fairy Tale of New York, right?
Oh, of
Um,
course, yeah. I mean, there's nothing that can ever touch that song.
oh my, it's so beautiful, man. Like I literally I start listening about 2 weeks before Christmas and don't end until like New Year's, and I probably listen to it 10 or 15 times a day, and I'm not
Yeah.
exaggerating.
No, no, I'm exactly the same. Last Christmas, just past that, I was working in this little kiosk where I was selling coffees outside of a little hut, and the people I was working for, they gave me this little Bluetooth player, and they told me to play some Christmas music, and it was just the Pogues all day,
Right.
every day.
That's awesome.
Because there's no Christmas song that's ever really captured that side of Christmas before.
Right.
There's always there's Mariah Carey as the polar opposite, and
Right.
that's the other song. So people are either going to play Mariah Carey, All I Want for Christmas Is You, or they're going to play the Pogues, and the Pogues just seem to have hit on this note that people just really seem to want to articulate but can't. It's just this glorious sort of celebration of the heartbreak of Christmas for a lot of
Right.
people.
Right. Not to mention, Shane being unabashedly alcoholic, right? And that
Yeah,
that definitely plays into that.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. I mean, um, he really did live it. I don't know if you watched the recent documentary produced by Johnny Depp, about
No.
Shane McGowan, but it's an incredible watch. And yeah, I mean, that guy, people talk about Keith Richards, and people talk about Slash, and people, but Shane
Right.
McGowan is just, it's a miracle. It is a miracle that he's still able to well, I don't know if he can form a coherent sentence these days, but it's a
No.
miracle that he's still able to even try.
No. I remember a few years back, maybe it was 4 or 5, 6 years ago, when
Yeah,
I believe it was Sinead O'Connor actually paid for him to get his teeth fixed, and
yeah,
or at
yeah,
least
yeah.
partially fixed. And
Yeah,
within
they
like
did a
2 years,
documentary about that, didn't they?
yeah. So what happened is like a couple years later, I see another picture, and they're basically right back to where they were before, right? So it's like,
Yeah,
he was like, yeah, that was great. He smiled for a little while, and then he was like, well, no, they're right back to where they were, you know. And I'm just wondering,
yeah,
like, what does one do to their teeth to make them that way? But that's a whole different subject. um,
yeah, yeah.
because as far as I know, he's primarily alcohol. I don't think he does a whole lot of other drugs.
He
Um,
used to do in the night. I know definitely in the 80s and maybe the 90s, he definitely did experiment with acid and heroin. Um,
mhm.
but obviously, alcohol is the one thing that's stuck over the last 40 or 50 years. I think he's in the documentary, he says he started drinking when he was about 7 years old because it was given to him by his parents. And
Wow.
he just kept going. But yeah, no, he definitely did his fair share of other drugs as well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised at all, but
Yeah,
he only talks about the alcohol. How's that?
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and it's just that the ease in which he talks about it too. Like, yeah, well, I had, I'm going to use the wrong terminology, but over here we would call him a handle, right, which is a
Yeah,
1.75 liter. It's like,
yeah.
I had like 3 of those today, and I was like, oh my, I can't, like, I like to drink, and I cannot imagine, you know, I can't imagine even going through one in, like a 48-hour period, like,
Yeah, yeah, no, totally. Shane McGowan is one person who I always turn to when I need a little bit of reassurance about my own relationship with alcohol.
right?
You know what I mean? Like if I think I'm going too far, then I'll look up a Shane McGowan interview,
Yeah.
and then it'll just okay. No, I'm good.
Yeah,
I'm good.
exactly. At least people can mostly understand what I'm saying, even when I'm super
Yeah,
hammered, but with him, not
exactly.
so much, not so much. Yet he was always able to sing, right? I mean, even when he was so drunk he couldn't
Yeah,
even like stand up. And I actually saw a show in Seattle. I forget when it was, but um, he had to be propped up into his, like, literally there was somebody standing behind him,
yeah,
holding him up
yeah.
in his chair.
Do you know
Um,
what year was that?
God, I don't remember at all. It would have been the early '90s, I think.
Early
Um,
90s. Okay. He has done gigs since then. He's done gigs, in the early 2000s where he was still able to coherently sing. And then he had an accident that rendered him unable to walk. So he's been in a wheelchair, I think, for the last maybe 10 years. And since then, it really did go downhill to the point where he couldn't actually remember the words. I think maybe after 2000,
oh,
I could be wrong here, but I think it's around 2006, 2007. After that, it really goes downhill to the point where he's forgetting the words, but people are happy to still show up
right.
and support him.
Yeah, and that's a rare thing, so I mean, more power to
Yeah.
him. Um, and that's actually a great little segue into what I think my personal favorite of yours, which is Bourbon and the Truth. Right? There's something about that song that I like. It's sort of the galloping, um, like what I would call like the early country music in in the United States. There's a little bit of that going on.
Yeah,
Um,
it's like a little bit of a train, a sort of a train.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
it's described as like a train on the tracks, just sort of keeps going and going and going. Really, really relentless production.
yeah. No, it's beautiful, and you got a couple of great zinger lines in there, right? Um, you somehow managed to bring in gun control debates and that sort of stuff into the song about just wanting to basically go home and drink and hope everything is okay the next morning, right? I mean,
Yeah, yeah,
that's um
yeah. Those sort of lines. The thing about the gun control debate and the Trump administration and even what was going on in our government at the time. All that stuff is really difficult subject matter to penetrate unless you can be a little bit subtle with it, or a little bit. Every time I mention something like that, you'll notice it's a throwaway line. It's almost like it's a joke.
Mm-hmm.
It's a throwaway line because it's very difficult subject matter to penetrate. If you try to do it too earnestly, you'll come off looking really cheesy and cliched and
Right.
preachy, and I don't like that kind of songwriting. So
Right.
if I've got something to say, I'll say it in the most sarcastic, throwaway
Right.
possible way. You know.
Right.
So it's what's the line? Um, I'm trying to think what it is now. It's if there's a God in heaven, could he please decide my fate, and decide which way I'm leaning on the gun control debate.
Right. Yeah, that's it.
It's just something I'm not going to go any further into it, because and then it sort of goes on to say the left are all deluded and the right are obsolete,
Yep.
and all that sort of stuff. And it's a bit, I didn't want to take any sides on that type of thing. I don't want to take sides, because once you take a side, then it's just, when Eminem first came out,
Mm-hmm.
when Eminem came out, the thing that made Eminem so great was the fact that he was just so above all he let everybody fight it out amongst themselves, and he just stood above it all and just completely slandered everyone.
Right.
So I sort of thought, like, I don't want to take a side on any of this stuff. I would rather just step back, let people fight it out amongst themselves, and just be like a journalist, like an unbiased
Sure.
journalist, and let people work it out for themselves. Because I've sort of gotten to the point in my life where I've realized that you can have a point of view, and that's great, but another person's point of view from the other side can be just as valid, and it's all based on how you've been raised, and what experiences you've had in your life has
Right.
always just leads you to that point of view. So I try not to get into a situation where I'm defending a point of view that might not be correct.
Right.
You know.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I don't know. I don't know where you grew up, but I grew up in a very, very, very small town that was extraordinarily conservative. It's changed dramatically since I was a kid, but it was super, super, super. What we would call redneck. Here, um,
What state did you grow up in?
northern Idaho.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And that was sort of pretty redneck, as you would put it.
Yeah. I mean, it was a mining town, so it was rough. You know, it'd be like places in England where there are coal miners, right? It was the same sort of grouping of people.
Yeah.
Um, and what I kind of learned through that is that I can't change anybody's opinion, right? I mean, it's
Yeah,
like sometimes
exactly.
it's like screaming at a wall, and there's no point. Um, and I've taken a lot of gruff from people because I don't stand up and take a big stand like, no, you can't say that,
Yeah.
because it's just not. I don't see it as being productive, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
so
I mean, it's I know exactly what you mean. It's just one of those things where you're never ever gonna you're never going to persuade somebody on the right to agree with you, and they're not going to persuade somebody on the left to agree with
that's
you.
right.
It's just going to be such a waste of energy that I'm trying to think of another way around the situation,
Right.
where there can be an amicable discussion about all the points, without these preconceived notions about the other side,
Right.
you know.
Absolutely. So I want to dig a little bit deeper into some of the lyrics on Bourbon and the Truth, because my personal favorite line is just when I made a song that mattered, the industry turned into glass and shattered. Now,
Yeah.
I assume that was done just after COVID, or just as that was hitting. Is that
No, no, good guess, but no, it's actually that's actually just talking about the music industry in general.
sure? Okay, yeah, valid.
'Cause, over, over the time, over the time that I've been involved in it. Um, because the music industry now is just so different than it was when I was a kid.
Hmm.
Obviously I knew nothing about it when I was a kid, but now in hindsight, what I know
Hmm.
about how it's changed in the last 30 years, um, it's that sort of thing where serious songwriters, it's getting harder and harder for serious songwriters and really any songwriter to get noticed,
Hmm.
because of the way things are now with Spotify. And it just takes people, if you want to find the good stuff, it takes you such a long time to wade through all the crap to actually
Right.
get to something. I mean, I I can't remember when it was the last time I can't remember the last time that I heard a song on the radio, or something that had been, really well exposed, that was presented on a radio station or whatever, that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up.
Right.
It just doesn't seem to happen anymore. It seems to be this sort of, this sort of swamp of mediocrity and stuff that doesn't really kick you in the balls the way this songs did. And that, again, that's going back to perspectives, because
Hmm.
that's just my perspective. I could
Right.
be completely wrong about that, but for me, it doesn't. Nothing really hits the mark, and nothing really moves the dial anymore. And the line about uh, right when I wrote a song that mattered, the industry turned into glass and shattered. It's just sort of a reference to the industry not being able to recognize, and it's sort of a tongue-in-cheek line saying that I'm
Right.
somebody that's worth, because I'm not, in real life, I'm not saying I'm anybody that's worth recognizing, but it's sort of a bit of a it's sort of a joke, where like, oh, I've written this amazing song and nobody's going to hear it because the music industry is in
Right.
such disarray. It's sort of inspired by there's a Leonard Cohen line in one of his songs, where he's talking about all this serious subject matter about death and about genocide. And then he says something like, there's all this killing and there's all this suffering and there's all my bad reviews,
Right.
like, so there's all this killing and there's this genocide, and there's all this, there's all this evil in the world and there's all my bad reviews, and he lumps that in the same sentence, and it's just, it was that type of, sort of a tongue-in-cheek joke, because the rest of Bourbon and the Truth is really all about, sort of depression and people dealing with the circumstances of the world
Right.
and politics and everything. And then it was just funny to me to throw in a line at the very end of the song saying, that, right when I wrote a song that mattered, the industry turned into glass and shattered, as bad an event as, all the destruction that preceded it.
Right. No, I
So
love that.
so it's just a bit of a joke, really.
Yeah, no, I think that it worked extraordinarily well. Um, I again, it's probably my favorite song from what from what you've done.
Thank you. To
Um,
be honest, it seems to be a lot of people's favorite songs, the one I've written. So I'm pretty happy with it, and I'm glad a lot of people like it and people got
yeah.
something from it.
I there's a particular artist that I have coming on in the next, well, hopefully a couple of weeks. Knock on wood. It's been a long time getting him on board, but um,
Yeah,
they're I'm not going to mention exactly who they are, but they're um, an American band. They
yeah.
were kind of based out of Seattle for a couple of decades. But they venture into country stuff, and I was like, I would love to hear what they would do with Bourbon and the Truth, right?
Yeah.
Because
Well,
they, yeah, they do country songs, but they also do like punky country, and they used to be like
yeah.
a punk band, um, and I think that would be really interesting. So we'll talk about this offline, but I really 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 want to get this guy coming on to actually take a listen to that, because
Yeah.
lyrically it's right in their wheelhouse, right? And
Okay. Okay.
yeah, the music is definitely in their wheelhouse too. So anyway, that's just neither here nor there. Um,
Well, one thing that I've always been interested in is writing songs for other artists.
hmm
100%. I'm not precious about, being, if one of my songs was successful with another artist, that would, that would mean more to me than me. You know, I don't care if I have a success with one of my
Hmm.
songs or somebody else does. You know, I'm more interested in being a songwriter.
Hmm.
You know, I definitely, you know, I'm sort of at a stage now. I'm 35 years old. I know enough about what from what I've heard and from what I've seen. I know enough to know that you know, I don't really give a damn about the spotlight. I would rather
Hmm.
be successful writing a song for another artist
Right.
and have it done that way than you know than me having success with the same song. I don't really care either way.
Right. Well,
So
there's
by all means, yes, you know, you can suggest that song to anybody you want.
I think, it's definitely a way to make more money, right? So people who are, successful, in songwriting,
Mm,
um, I personally would way rather have, a cut of publishing than a cut of album royalties, like any
yeah,
day of
of
the year, you
course,
know?
yeah, yeah,
Um, and the truly successful people, there's only a handful are the ones that write songs for other people and for themselves, right? So they end up, with double publishing. They end up with album sale, like whatever. Um, I think
yeah,
most of those people are gone now. I mean, there are a couple that are still alive, but they're pushing 70, 75. Um,
yeah,
but definitely, yeah. I mean, it's sort of like um, when I write software, right? When I write software,
yeah,
it's like a baby to me, right? And I want to keep a hold of that baby as long as I possibly can. But
yeah.
I'd rather somebody else take it and do something with it than it just like dying. So
Yeah, exactly, man. Exactly. And the thing is, with writing a song, once you've written it, yeah, you can definitely be too close to it where you don't want anybody interfering with it.
right.
But that it can be also a blessing just to give it to somebody else and see what they can do with it because they might have a lot more talent than you in
Hmm.
regards to performing the song. You
Right.
know, obviously, it's no, you know, everybody knows that one of my all-time heroes is Bob Dylan. I mean, what
Hmm.
songwriter isn't influenced by Bob Dylan? But
Hmm.
you know, the songs that he wrote in the '60s, like Mr. Tambourine Man and all these other songs that were recorded by other artists. The other artists just were able to bring something out in the melody that people who love Bob Dylan don't really care about, but the rest of the world just finds a little bit more accessible,
Right.
you
So
know. And I think that if somebody takes on one of your songs and just sings it a little better or does something a little bit different with the melody, you know,
right.
it's just I personally I would just be completely flattered by
So
that.
it's so funny you mentioned Bob Dylan because I have this. You've probably seen me posted on Facebook a few times. My rage about Bob Dylan. Like I just can't stand
Oh
him at
no,
all.
actually, well,
No.
I do
Well,
follow you on Facebook, but I haven't seen the what's the rage?
the rage is I can't stand his voice. Like I can't stand it. But he's
Oh,
an
that's such a
incredible
good kid.
he's an incredible songwriter, right? So,
Yeah.
like I like I think what I've said about Bob Dylan is like he's the worst performer in the world who writes the best songs that other people cover in an awesome way, right?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
an example is one of my favorite examples is Ministry did a cover of Lay Lady Lay, right?
Okay, yeah.
So the original of Lay Lady Lay literally makes me want to poke my eyes out with a fork. Like it's just like it's so bad. Um,
Yeah.
I guess I would call it boring. It bores the hell out of me.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
but Ministry, of course, did their own little take on it, and it's incredible. It's like, wow, this is great, or Mike Ness from Social Distortion when he does, um, oh my god, I can't believe I just forgot the name of the song. Don't Think Twice. Um,
Oh yeah.
Another song that the original makes me want to like, put a gun to my head, but when
Yeah.
done by somebody else, it's like, oh, okay, now I see where that's coming from.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. No, I totally understand that. I mean, I'm a massive Dylan fan, so you know, I've got no problem with his voice or his delivery, but at the same time, it's very easy to see why a lot of people do. You know, it's very, very easy for me to see why a lot of people have exactly the same complaints that you have.
yeah,
Because you either it's just one of those things where you either love it or you don't, and
yeah,
that's one of the great things about Dylan. He's just so divisive, but one thing that everybody can agree on is that he's just writing or wrote some of the best songs that we'll ever hear in our lifetime.
Yep, I'm totally down with that, and I completely respect people who adore Bob Dylan. I really do. It's just not
That
for me.
song, yeah, no, yeah, totally, and no, that's the thing. I think it's just really easy to see why it's not for everybody. I think that's
Right.
why, because I just another one of those things where it's sort of like what we were talking about earlier with the politics. It's like you don't want to take sides. I absolutely love Bob Dylan. I can listen to his albums all day long, but at the same time, I have enough. You have enough of an ear to see why a lot of people would find it really repellent. You
Right.
know.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, it's like Tom Waits, and I had this is a kind of a
Oh,
funny story. He's at
what are you going to say about Tom Waits, Glenn? Because I
well,
love Tom
no,
Waits.
no, no, hold on, hold on. I didn't say anything bad about him, but I had actually an old friend of mine from high school, somebody that I
Yeah.
kind of sort of stayed in touch with, whatever, and he came on the show, and
Mm.
right before he came on, we were talking a little bit, and it turned out he was Tom Waits' guitarist for a tour that he had done,
Jesus.
and I didn't know that, and so we were talking about that whole thing, and the only thing I was going to say about Tom Waits is that he's got this weird thing where his voice is, I mean, it's an acquired taste. There's no doubt,
Oh
right? I
yeah.
mean, totally acquired taste. Um, but the one thing that Omar Torres, the guy who was on with me, said is, he uses his voice like an instrument. Like he
Yeah.
is keenly aware of the sound of his voice and the uniqueness, and he actually works on that to make it as unique as humanly possible,
Yeah.
right? To like match the, and so I have a great respect for him, and I've seen him live a couple of times. Um, Never had a bad time, never had a bad time listening to him, but he's one of those artists I've never owned a single Tom Waits record.
Really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
just the way it
No,
is.
I totally get that. With Tom Waits, I mean, he's another one of my heroes in terms of lyrical, lyrical genius.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I whenever I go back home to Northern Ireland, I always let my parents hear, the songs that I'm listening to because they've got a great taste in music, and that's something that my parents and I really bond over. Is our
Mm-hmm.
different the songs that we like. Because they introduced me to Leonard Cohen and Bob Dylan, and I've sort of gotten to the stage where I've really gotten into both of those
Mm-hmm.
artists, and then Tom Waits is sort of like a natural progression from that when it comes to lyrics. And when I go back to Northern Ireland, I play my mom and dad Tom Waits records, but I don't just play them and let them listen. I play them, but I bring the lyrics up on the the iPad or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
lyrics up so that my mom and dad can follow the lyrics while they're listening to the song.
Mm-hmm.
And that's unfortunately that's something you have to do with Tom Waits because I think a lot of people would be turned off by the voice initially,
Right.
because you can't. There's a lot of Tom Waits' best songs you cannot make out a word he's saying, but when you hold up the lyrics and somebody's able to actually follow what he's saying, it just transforms it into this like holy God, this is really brilliant writing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's something that's really special about Tom Waits is the fact that even if you hate his voice, which is it's sometimes, especially on his albums post 1985, his voice is sometimes unlistenable. It's just
Right.
so gravelly and the words are just inaudible. But if you let people read the lyrics while they're listening to the song, I think it really does transform the experience.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a hysterical, and when I find it, I'll share it with you. But a
Yeah.
hysterical interview with Tom Waits on some stupid American talk show in like the late '70s, and he sits down, and he's got a glass of bourbon next to him, and he's got a cigarette, and he's like smoking the whole time, and back when you could do that on TV,
Of
and
course, yeah.
so he's doing that whole thing, and the host, it was sort of one of those like smart ass sort of TV shows, probably pretty uniquely American, in how
Yeah.
dickish it was, but the host looked at him and said, "So you're a famous singer, right?" And everyone starts laughing because his voice, to just even talking is like almost illegible, right? And this is
Yeah.
back when he was
Yeah.
young, and he just went with it. He thought that was great. He's like, well,
Yeah.
my voice gets better if I have some more bourbon, and he like reaches over and grabs the glass from his or from the host. Um, so he always kind of had that sort of yeah, I
Yeah.
know I sound funny, but that's me. Like that's the shtick. That this is what Tom Waits is all
Yeah.
about.
Yeah.
Which I found really really interesting. Um, but we've talked about a bunch of other people. We haven't talked about you at all. Um, well, I mean, we've talked a little bit about you, but um, how are you? Are you able to play anywhere live, or have you been able to play anywhere live in like the last year, or is it just the Facebook things that you're doing?
I think just the Facebook. I think the last live gig I did was it was probably last summer, around July. There was somebody who was able to have a socially distant wedding party
Mm-hmm.
in an open park in the middle of England, and they asked me if I could come and play a few songs, and I did. And that's literally the last time I played live. Before that, the last time I played live was February of 2020.
Wow.
So yeah, yeah, it's a shame because it was obviously, I'm a songwriter, and I'm trying to make some sort of career out of writing songs and being a singer songwriter. But to be honest, I'm 35 years old now, and I have to think about seriously making a living out of music. So
Right.
otherwise, because otherwise it's just going to be something that I don't enjoy. And the best way for me to make a living out of music is to play private parties and weddings and
Mm-hmm.
bars,
Right.
and that was something that was starting to go pretty well for me at the start of 2020, because I spent a lot of 2019, really going at it. I just moved in with my girlfriend in 2019 in Kent, and I spent a lot of time traveling around the county, just speaking to a lot of different landlords and landladies of different
Mm-hmm.
bars and
Mm-hmm.
pubs, and just trying to get my foot in the door. And it was getting to the stage where, it was playing in bars and also getting my name around the wedding circuit.
Mm-hmm.
That was really starting to happen, and there's a lot of money to be made for somebody who can play a lot of songs. There's a
Yeah.
lot of money to be made in the wedding and private party industry, and that was something that was looking really hopeful for me at the start of last year. And then all of a sudden, this thing hit, and that all went away. But to be honest, I'm not. I'm really lucky. I'm not, because I'm in a situation where I've got there's a nearby farm shop that I've been able to get some work on during
Mm-hmm.
the year. To keep some income
Right.
coming in, and that really helped me out last year, and it's going to help me out again this year.
Well, that's good.
And the way I see it, a lot of people think that this this century it's going to be like a repeat of last century, where we're going to have another round of the Roaring Twenties.
Mm-hmm.
Because once the wedding industry and the party industry, people are just busting to get out of the house and give each other a hug and socialize
Right.
and go out drinking together. And I think once that happens, then I'm going to be, as long as I can keep the determination up and go around and promote myself, to all these different venues and bars. I think it's going to
Mm-hmm.
come back in a way that's it's going to be a blessing in disguise in some ways.
I think
I
it
think
probably
people
will be.
are going to be crying out for that type of just to be somewhere where there's live music playing and people can put
Right.
their arm around each other.
I mean,
I think that's
the
going to
only
be a
thing I would
massive.
say with that, Pete, is that I think that's very valid, and very good friend of mine who was actually on a week ago um, has basically made his living doing that for the last 40 years, right?
Yeah,
Um, but I think you might be selling yourself a little bit short too, right? I mean, like that's a great goal. It's like just make your money, doing weddings and private parties and whatnot.
yeah,
But I think you have a little bit more to offer than that. Actually, quite a bit
yeah,
more than that. So that's all I'm going to say. This is not I'm not Dr. Phil.
No, yeah, no, I appreciate that. But the thing with the wedding and private party industry, that's sort of my bread and butter.
Hmm.
That's what I want, just to make a solid living from, so that I'm getting a steady income every month. But
Sure.
the thing with doing that type of thing, that's I'm not going to settle. I'm not going to settle for that by any means. The reason I want to do that is because it gives me a chance to do what I love doing in some respect, but it also affords me the time to work
Hmm.
on my own music and to
Right.
put it out there. I'm not going to settle for that. I'm not just going to say, well, I'm a wedding singer for the rest of my life. That's not what I want to do. But I just know that there's a lot of money to be made there, and if
Right.
that can keep me sustained, and can give me the money to go into the studio and record my own song and put it out there, then it's the perfect balance of everything.
Yeah, that's extraordinarily pragmatic, right? Um, so I'm totally down with that. And plus, if you've seen the movie The Wedding Singer, Adam Sandler, he ended up with Drew Barrymore. So, hey, not so bad, right?
Exactly. You can't
you
do
could
any worse than
you
Drew
could do a
Barrymore.
lot worse than that. Um, Plus, Billy Idol made a cameo in that movie, which I think is just
Oh,
hysterical.
that was awesome. Oh, what was it he said? And since we let our first class passengers do pretty much whatever they want.
Right. Yeah,
But as
totally.
he's coming down, when Billy Idol's coming down with the trolley tray, and Drew Barrymore's husband to be is just like, "Don't push me, Billy. I'm warning you."
Right.
You feel like
So
he knows
funny.
him.
Yeah, the thing I don't like Adam Sandler very much, but I do love that movie. And the thing that pissed me off more than anything is that her
Yeah.
fiance's name was Glenn, and it was like, this guy's a total fucking dick. Like, and Glenn is not a common name, at least in the States, right? So I'm like, are you serious? Really? You had to name him? Okay, you know,
Yeah.
literally any other name would have been fine.
To be honest, I don't like Adam Sandler much either, but there was a couple of, I think he started off really well. The Wedding Singer and Happy Gilmore, he had a couple of
Hmm.
great movies before he went off the rails and just started doing pretty much any movie that was offered to him.
Right, right. Well, any movie where he got to be an idiot, right? Like that was the whole thing. Like, hey, I'm an idiot. Look at me. I'm an idiot, right?
Yeah.
Um, wow,
Yeah,
we
it's a
we
shame because he was a pretty funny guy.
yeah. I mean, this is fun. So we've covered Bob Dylan and Shane MacGowan and Tom Waits and Adam Sandler all in the last couple of minutes here. It's always
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah.
Um, I want to talk about how we met, and then I want to kind of finish off with like what you're doing now and like um, maybe a slightly deeper introduction to like the music of Pete Gardiner, like what you're all about and whatnot.
Yeah, yeah. Cool, man.
So I don't remember what
Uh,
year it was, 2017
I
maybe.
was going to say, should we take a quick break?
Yep, let's do that. Hey Pete, so we're back from a much needed pee and smoke break.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, always good, man, always good. People have to do that stuff. Um, I wanted to talk a little bit about how we met because that was an incredibly fun night for me. Um,
Yeah.
and it was weird because I was already feeling zero pain when I met you and your sister. I was, I was well into my cups, um, and I was about to go home actually. So for people listening, this is at the Rainbow in Hollywood, and um, I was working for a company right across the street from the Rainbow at the time. So, um, what that meant is I didn't spend any time in the office at all. I was always at the Rainbow, right? Like I literally worked from the Rainbow, for a week out of the month or whatever. Um, and so I was sitting there, and that was actually the same day, right before I met you and your sister, that I met Don Dawkin for the first time. So it was just a really weird day for me all the way around, right? And I think I was
Yeah.
there from like noon until like midnight. It was one of those sorts of days. Um,
Yeah.
and I think
I
I
mean,
think it was your sister who turned around and said, "Hey," 'cause she's very outgoing. She's kind of like, "Hey, how are you? What's your name?" And I was like, "Okay, this is weird."
no, I don't know. I remember it. Uh, I remember it slightly differently. There was I was just going to ask you first of all that if you got home safe to Seattle, because as I recall, when I first met you, you told me that you were you'd missed your flight back home, and
Oh,
that
I think I did. So
you'd already missed your flight, so you decided to spend the rest of your evening at the Rainbow Bar and Grill. Now,
yes,
my sister and I, we were having this no, what was no doubt a very insightful and revolutionary conversation about 80s rock music.
right,
And the subject of Skid Row came up, and we were talking about Skid Row and the pros and cons of that band. And then out of nowhere, I remember you piping up from the other side of the bar and saying, "Hey, Skid Row were never going to make it because they weren't from Los Angeles." And I'm
oh,
not trying to be smart. And I'm not trying to be a smart ass, but that's just why they didn't fit in with everybody else, because they weren't from Los Angeles. And then from that moment on, we just started clicking and we just
right.
started talking. And I think the rest of the evening was just a really fun conversation about 80s and 90s rock music in Los Angeles and Seattle.
It was so much fun. And the thing, of
Yeah,
course, of about the rainbow is you never know who's around, right? Like I
yeah,
said, I met Don Dokken the day, earlier that day. Just randomly, I was petting his dog and was like, "Oh wait, you're Don Dokken. That's weird," you know.
yeah,
But
yeah,
the thing I remember the most, and again, I was well into my cups. Like
yeah,
I had missed my flight kind of on purpose. I was going through my second divorce at the time, so I didn't really want to go
yeah,
home. Um,
yeah.
I probably would have stayed in LA for another, month if I could have. But um, so we're having this conversation, and there was that guy sitting like two seats down from you guys, right? So I was
Yeah.
in the magical Lemmy seat, right? Like right by the
Oh
the
yeah,
poker
yeah,
machine.
yeah. I actually had my picture taken in that seat like just the day before. Yeah, so
Yeah,
you were in the Lemmy seat. Definitely. I do remember that because we were on the adjacent side of the Lemmy seat,
right,
and you were
right.
sitting there with your sunglasses on, and yeah, I remember.
um, and yeah, I think there's a picture of you and I right in front of the Lemmy statue from that night as well. But
Yeah.
again, a lot of this is a blur. But the one thing I do remember that was a lot of fun was there was a guy sitting like two seats down from you and your sister, um, who kept. You could tell like he wanted to jump into the conversation so much, because we were talking about like Sunset Strip in the the mid '80s and whatnot. And he finally jumped in, and he said something along the lines of, "Well, I would know my band. I was in this band. I forget what it was. It was a band like Dangerous Toys, but it wasn't even that high of a level. It was somebody like,
It's probably like a Wet Cherry or something like that.
yeah, it was such a stupid band name, and I vaguely remember hearing about them, but pretty sure I'd never heard anything from them. And he kept telling these stories, and I'd have to stop him every few minutes and be like, "No, dude, that's not what happened." Right? And he's
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
"But I
yeah.
was there." And I was like, "Well, obviously you weren't there because
Yeah.
that's not what happened." And he finally got so angry, he just kind of looked at me and he's like, "Well, then why don't you tell the fucking story?" And I was like, "Okay, I'll tell the story." I don't even know what story you're trying to tell, but fuck it, I'll do it.
Yeah.
He got
Yeah.
so angry.
Oh, it was so funny. It was so funny. But then that led to us having one of the best conversations ever, because I remember that was the first time. I mean, I'm really interested in. I wasn't old enough to appreciate the whole Seattle scene when it first emerged, but I was always so interested in it in hindsight. And when I met you, that was the first time I'd met somebody from Seattle who had gone through it,
Hmm.
who I could have a proper conversation with about what it was actually like to be there at the time when this whole thing took off.
Right.
Um, because I had this sort of weird relationship with rock music where, a lot of people who loved all the 80s rock bands and all the hair metal bands, then, their dream was killed by the Seattle music scene.
Right.
And I have this really beautiful, unique vantage point where I can appreciate both sides of it
Hmm.
without any judgment, because I grew up listening to so many 80s hair metal bands and I love them all. And,
Hmm.
I have this thing in my life where I seem to catch on to things 10 years too late. I was born in 1986, which was the golden age of the power ballad.
Right.
Um, you know, um, but I have my love of rock music comes from probably I have this cousin who was 10 years older than me who introduced me to Guns N' Roses. And then later on, he introduced me to Aerosmith. And I was in my teenage years, I was listening to Guns N' Roses and Aerosmith while everybody else in my school was listening to stuff like, Blink 182 and new metal bands like Limp Bizkit and all that sort of stuff.
Right.
And I just couldn't relate to it. I'd never ever related to anything that was going on around me at the time. I always had to go back at least 10 years to find a band that I liked. And I thank God for my cousin, because he introduced me to Guns N' Roses and Aerosmith like when I was like 6 or 7 years old.
Right.
And that was really sparked my apartment. Like my dad had another part to play in my musical upbringing. He let me hear Meatloaf and all this stuff when I was a kid, and Queen.
Right.
And I always just felt like I didn't belong in the town that I was born, so I was always growing up thinking that all the music that was worth listening to was like 10 years behind me or 20 years behind me. So when everybody else was listening to Blink 182 and Limp Bizkit, I was just constantly listening to like Aerosmith and Def Leppard and Guns N' Roses. And then when I got to the early 2000s and like 2005, then I started discovering all this great music that came out of Seattle, Pearl Jam and everything else, and Soundgarden. And, it just seems like everything that happens to me, it's like, it's always 10 years too late, which is brilliant. I don't want to relate to everything that's going on around me at the time. I'd rather just like look back. But what I'm saying is, I'm able to look back at the hair metal genre and the grunge genre and appreciate both at the same time.
Sure. Yeah, no, definitely, myself included. Like I unabashedly love the hair metal stuff. Like I love it. Um,
Yeah.
and I obviously, because simply of I think by virtue of being here in Seattle, like, as that stuff was happening, um, I love that stuff, but probably in a different way than somebody like yourself does. Right. So to
Yeah.
me, it's nostalgia. Right.
Yeah.
Um, not to say that a lot of those bands weren't phenomenal, and I've had several of them, on, to talk about this stuff. Um,
Yeah.
it's not that it just there's a level of nostalgia that is it definitely enhances the appreciation of the music, right?
Yeah.
Um, and a little while ago you mentioned like listening to the radio and whatnot, and when the few times I've listened to the radio in say the last 20 years, very very rarely, all I hear are songs from 20 or 30 years ago, right? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
there is very little new stuff that comes out, and when it does, it doesn't fit. So here's just a brief example. There's a radio station, or used to be a radio station in Seattle, called
Yeah.
The End,
Yeah.
KNDD, and I had Marco Collins, who was, I mean, Marco's a phenomenal guy. I highly recommend you go and listen to that chat I had with him. But
Yeah.
he's
Yeah.
he's credited with breaking, so many different bands, because he would basically he did kind of like an almost pirate radio thing, from
Yeah.
this commercial radio station. Um, I totally forgot where I was going to go with that. Something somewhere really good, but it just
Oh,
slipped
don't
right out of
worry.
my head.
Yeah.
Um,
Don't worry, man.
I think that music is very situational, right? I mean, it's very situational. And
Yeah.
when somebody gives me, grief or whatnot, or, for liking like Quiet Riot, which I unabashedly love,
Yeah.
it's because
Yeah.
it it scratches that itch that I have, right? Like, I mean, it's nostalgia again. I love it, you
Yeah.
know?
I think you've touched on a point that I was going to make. I mean, you mentioned Brett Michaels earlier, and I completely understand that he's a bit of a joke.
Right.
I totally get where that is. But when I was 6 or 7 years old, my cousin let me hear a Poison record, and that because I think because I listened to them back when I was that young,
Mm-hmm.
it sort of like has this thing for me where I it's like a real guilty pleasure. But Poison, there's a couple of albums in their back catalog where I just absolutely love, but just because I associate it with my childhood and with growing
Yeah.
up and with learning to love music. And I, since then, obviously, in hindsight, you've seen all the documentaries. Everybody ridicules Poison for being like, the poster boys for really sort of sissy hair metal that everybody takes the piss out of,
Right.
you know. But I can't help it. It just brings back a lot of great memories for me, and I love listening to the old Poison records. Every rose has its thorn and all this stuff. I just love it, and yeah, I know exactly what you mean by nostalgia. But what I was saying to you was, when we met in Los Angeles, you were the first person I met who had actually gone through the whole Seattle early 90s surgence,
Hmm.
in rock music there. You're the first person, and I tried to get a little bit of insight into what it was like to actually go through that while it was happening. And you quite rightly said to me, like, it doesn't, when you're going through it yourself, you don't notice it.
Not at all.
Because I'm obviously coming at the whole scene like 10, 20 years later, and I'm looking back at it with everybody else in the documentaries and it's like, oh, this grunge thing happened and it killed hair metal. But when you're going through it at the time, it's probably absolutely nothing like that. It's probably just like, you see all these bands coming up, but you don't realize that you're part of something so special.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. I would liken Seattle from the mid '80s to the very early '90s to be very similar to like Birmingham, right, or even
Yeah.
Manchester, right, where you've got this thing that's happening, but again, nobody knew it was happening, right? Or
Yeah.
even like Minneapolis, like in the the early '80s with like Husker Du and Soul Asylum, bands like that. You don't know that something is happening. All you know is like, hey, I can go out and watch great music, 7 days a
Yeah.
week, right? Which I
Yeah.
did. I literally was at a music venue at least 4 or 5 times a week.
Yeah.
And the bands didn't even matter. See, that's the real kicker. I had my favorites, of course, but I didn't care so much who was playing. I just knew
Yeah.
that certain venues would have great collections of shows, and I just go and figure it out. Um,
Yeah, it's almost parallel. What you guys went through in Seattle is almost parallel to what London went through with the punk rock scene.
yeah,
I mean, it gets to the stage where, because the punk rock was born out of people being frustrated with the fact that bands like Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath, they were completely untouchable, and you couldn't go to see Black Sabbath and Led Zeppelin unless you had a ticket, and they were just like untouchable rock gods.
right,
But this whole thing in the late 70s, it's born into this sort of gritty, grimy sort of underground scene. Everybody could go out and touch the bands that were playing. They could they could get like just hot and sweaty with the bands that were actually playing. You
right.
know what I mean? It
Yeah,
was just like they could reach out and touch them, and they were part of it. And it was just all this big scene that just emerged. And I sort of feel like what happened in Seattle was exactly the same thing. It was like almost a response to the fact that people could not go out and touch Guns N' Roses or touch Def Leppard. They were just too high on this pedestal where you could never get anywhere near them. But then all these gritty, grimy bands start coming out again, like Screaming Trees and you know, uh, Soundgarden and all
hmm
these bands. Like, they just start playing in all these clubs, and people are just like, "Fuck, this is what music is about again." So then it's almost like Seattle got its own version of punk rock.
oh, without a
Um, you know,
doubt.
yeah, it was just like their own version of punk rock that just came out, and everybody loved it. And then, of course, like everything, people latch onto the record companies. Unfortunately, caught wind to it and
Right.
destroyed it.
Yeah.
You know, but I mean, it was just such an unbelievable, even just for those 2 or 3 years, from like 89 to 94. It was just these 4 or 5 years of just brilliant music and brilliant, just this brilliant community of bands that came together. And then, like anything else, once people catch on to it, then it's going to die because people exploit it.
Yeah, no, that's really, really accurate. Um, and there's also that sort of like ingrained thing that I think humans have where if you really really like something and you're kind of obsessed with it, and then suddenly millions of other people also like it, it's kind of like and you have that internal struggle. At least I do, that internal struggle as to whether I still want to vocally talk about how much I love a band, when they have like 10 million
Yeah.
followers versus like 100. Um, and it's totally self-centered. I mean, let's be perfectly honest, right? It's
Yeah.
not wanting to share your experience with other people, right? Um,
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like when I was a kid, like when I first got into Guns N' Roses when I was like 7 or 8 years old, and Guns N' Roses were my life. I was all consumed by them until I was 18. But when I first, like my cousin, I didn't even hear Appetite for Destruction first. I think it was Use Your Illusions 2. Um, he let me hear a tape, and it was just such a like there was just something magical about that band, because the
mhm,
thing was back then it was music was such a myth, you couldn't like today I can Google or look up any interview with Guns N' Roses or look up anything I want to know about the band. Back then I could not look up anything, it was just
right,
I was just a kid and I'd heard this record and I was like, oh my God, this band is just it's just mine and nobody else knows about it. I had no
right,
idea how big Guns N' Roses were. I just thought it was this band that I'd discovered because my cousin had let me hear the album, and I thought it was this band that I discovered that nobody else knew about, and I was just so cool because I knew all about this band, and then they were my heroes, and it's just crazy because then later on you grow up and during my teenage years, I was telling you earlier about me listening. I'm listening to Guns N' Roses. Everybody else is listening to like Blink 182 or Sum 41 or whatever crap
right,
is on the radio at the time. But then as they grow up, we got to about 17 years old or 18 years old, and everybody is like saying, "Oh my God, Guns N' Roses, they're the shit." Everybody is jumping on the bandwagon again all
right.
of a sudden. And I'm like, well, yeah, I've been listening to this stuff since I was like 6 or 7 years old. You guys are just catching
Yeah,
on to it.
and yeah, and that definitely happens, and
And I was really lucky. Um,
yeah. Sorry, you just kind of cut out a little bit there, but I think you're back, so
yeah,
it's all
yeah,
good.
no worries.
Um, yeah, people in Seattle. This is a little bit before my time, but people in Seattle when they first saw Guns N' Roses were like, "Holy shit, that's Duff!" And Duff had he had been a drummer. I mean, he had done like all sorts of stuff in Seattle. From the time he was like 15 or 16,
Yeah,
right? Um, and I think he doesn't quite get enough credit. Like he was
yeah,
from that era definitely the first one to have like I mean a super 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 major label breakout, right?
yeah,
And I don't think he gets that credit because oh, he moved to LA and he had people who weren't from Seattle in the band. Um,
yeah,
but one of Guns N' Roses' first shows was actually in Seattle, right? There's an
yeah,
entire I don't know if you've read um, Duff's biography, which is
yeah,
phenomenal.
yeah. Read it. Yeah,
But that whole story of them trying to get up to Seattle to play the show and how it was just like um,
yeah,
it nothing worked like the whole way up, like nothing worked, and the show itself didn't. I forget, I think that show they actually had to cancel if I remember correctly, but anyway, it was sort
yeah.
of
I think that was the tour. There was at the tour from hell.
yeah, yeah. It took him like 2 weeks to get from LA to Seattle, because their van kept breaking down, like one of those sorts of stories. And I kind of look at that as it's sort of an apocryphal sort of story, right? I mean, it makes
Yeah,
sense. He stepped outside of. Well, actually, okay. Let me finish this thought. But he kind of stepped outside of what he had done in Seattle, and that it was almost like the universe was saying, like, no, you're not. You can't come back yet, right? Like you have to
yeah,
make you have to become an international superstar before you can even come back, and that was pretty interesting to me, right? Like everything just
yeah.
fell apart.
I mean, what I sort of see it is, in hindsight, that's another thing. Like because I'm coming up, as I said, I was born in 1986, so I was too young to see everything unfolding as it happened.
Right.
But because I just love the music so much, I'm able to look at it in hindsight and sort of watch what was happening. And with Guns N' Roses, I always think that they played a major part in because they were so much better than the hair metal genre that they emerged from.
Yeah.
You know, they were just so it was just musically and lyrically, they were just on a different playing field. So I always think that like Guns N' Roses bridged the gap from the classic rock hair metal stuff of the late 80s and to this Seattle scene in the early 90s, because I think when Appetite for Destruction came out, it just had such balls, and such integrity that you couldn't really go back anymore. You couldn't really go back and do albums like Poison's first album.
No.
It was just laughable. It was just laughable, really. And then after that, when bands like Pearl Jam started coming out, it was just right. Okay, the playing field has definitely changed.
Yeah,
You
without a
know,
doubt.
and yeah, and I think Guns N' Roses don't get credited enough probably for bridging that gap between the sort of hair metal genre and the grunge genre, because obviously Guns N' Roses aren't grunge, but they're certainly not hair metal either. They're just
No,
too
not at
good.
all. No, not at all. And that reminds me of we don't have to talk about this very much, but um, reminds me of a theory I have, which is that Motley Crue, at least the
Oh,
first
yeah,
two albums, um,
yeah,
was a legitimate successor to like the New York Dolls, right? I mean, it's to
yeah,
me, it's an
definitely.
obvious transition, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Um, and I think a lot of people don't understand because they listen to like the later Motley Crue stuff, which was radically different. But it was the same as
yeah,
Guns N' Roses, right? I mean, the first Guns N' Roses album is it's a hard rock album, man. That's it's just a rock album. That's all it is, man. Um, it's not metal. It's certainly not grunge. It's not,
yeah.
it's just hard rock. And you can
It's
definitely
just,
hear the influences.
yeah, it was almost like the second coming of the Rolling Stones.
That's okay. Yeah. No, I mean, I'll give you that. I'll give you that.
Yeah, I mean, it was just pure, because everything else before that, it was just it Appetite for Destruction had so much balls behind it that it just couldn't, you can't lump it in with all those hair metal albums. They were so the hair metal albums that were preceded Appetite for Destruction were so perfectly produced, and it got to the stage where it was getting really laughable.
Right.
There was no credibility to it anymore. And then Guns N' Roses just came in and laid down the gauntlet and just blew everything out of the water. And then
Right.
all these other bands like Warrant and Rat are like, oh shit, okay, what are we gonna do? What are we gonna do now? Because that's just fucked everything up.
Yep.
You know?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's funny. People, in retrospect, tend to blame the quote grunge movement, which I can't stand a word more than I hate that particular word. But people
I
tend,
know. I don't even feel right calling it grunge, because I know that all the bands involved in that movement don't even like that word. I'm just calling it grunge for the sake of simplicity and
sure,
understanding what we're
of
talking
course,
about.
of course.
So I completely understand. Like Pearl Jam would just laugh you off the stage if you try to call them a grunge band. You know what I mean?
I mean, Pearl
There's
Jam
so much,
is
there's so much more than that.
Pearl Jam is the logical extension to like '70s arena rock, right? I mean, as far as I'm
Yeah,
concerned,
yeah,
just a stripped down version of that. Um,
yeah,
God, we could probably talk for a long time on this, but we're not going to. Um,
yeah.
I wanted. I have two questions for you. Okay. Um, one is one of my favorites, which I'm sorry, I'll wait until the end for that one.
All right.
So the first one is what what does Pete Gardiner see himself doing in the next 5 years? Like, I mean, we've kind of touched on it a little bit, but where would you like to see yourself in say like 5 years?
It's difficult because when you're a kid and you first pick up a guitar and you start trying to write songs, I think I'm not sure if everybody has the same feeling, but I had when I started trying to write my first song, I was about 14 or 15 years old.
Hmm.
Uh, I can't really explain it, but I've been in a lot of bands and stuff, since then.
Mm-hmm.
I knew, but there was something about it where I knew for a fact that no matter what happened, like this, when I was 16 or 17 years old, I knew that I was going to be the only person in my circle of friends that was going to be doing any sort of kind of music or writing songs or being in a band or
Mm-hmm.
composing or anything when I was in my 30s. I just knew I was going to be doing it for the rest of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And you hear the same story from a lot of people who have made it. And then obviously you don't hear about the people who haven't made it, so you can't really, it's really hard to judge, but I can't really see a future um, for me that doesn't involve me writing songs or playing music or entertaining people. It
Yeah.
just seems to be a little bit too ingrained in my personality and a little bit too in my blood to ignore.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's just something that, I mean, when I was when I was 15 or when I was 15 or so, and or maybe 16 or so, I can't remember, 15, 16 or 17, I was in my first band. And we played to a few people in the local venues and whatever, and it was great fun.
Mm-hmm.
And there's just something about it where it's just something that you're going to be doing for the rest of your life. And unfortunately, the music industry, the way it is today, it's made it very difficult for serious songwriters to make their way in the world. But um, I mean, in the next 5 years, there's absolutely no way that I'm going to have given this up.
Right. Good. I mean
It's just
that's
it's just too ingrained in me. I just can't seem to let go of it. It's just
yeah.
everybody, it's a bit of a cliche. A lot of people say, oh, I was put on this earth to do this, or I was put on this planet to do this. But I mean, Jesus, I've definitely been put on this planet to write songs and play to people, and there's nothing I'd rather do. So I'm going to do that in any respect that I can,
Mm-hmm.
over the next
Good.
few years.
Good. I'm happy to hear that, for one. Um, and I will make sure that I link to all of your new music and whatnot, in the video. Um,
Yeah,
but
please
Pete,
do.
we've got kind of a hard stop coming up here, but I want to ask you the question that I have started asking everyone at the very end, and nobody
Yeah,
likes
yeah.
it. You know what it is, right?
Oh, fuck no. What is
Okay,
it?
okay. The question is, what is something about you that nobody would know?
That nobody would know?
Well, not nobody, but I mean, that the average person just like looking at you like, let's say they went and searched the internet all over, found your songs and whatnot, um, and whatever interviews you had done in the past and whatnot, but something that people just wouldn't, it would be surprising to them to learn about you.
Well, the only interesting fact about me as a person is that I am actually completely and totally blind in my left eye.
Are you really?
Yeah, yeah, 100%. Yeah, I can't see an effing thing out of my left eye.
Wow.
I was born with some sort of scar at the back of my left eye that prevented the optic nerves from developing.
Uh huh.
So I've been sort of living my whole life with this, just with just looking out of my right eye. Okay. And the
Wow.
funny thing is, I mean, I've never considered it a disability because I don't know any better.
Hmm.
But like about 5 or 6 years ago, when 3D movies started becoming popular, my cousin and my sister and I, we went to this. It was like the new 3D Saw movie, you
Hmm.
know, and we got to the end of the movie and we were all walking out of the cinema. And I said, I didn't really see any 3D. I didn't see one 3D portion of that movie at all. What's going on? Why?
Oh
It turned
man.
out that because I can't see out of my left eye, you actually need both eyes for the depth perception to
Hmm.
actually see the 3D movie. So I watched this whole 3D movie and I was like, "What's the big deal? It just looks like a 2D movie to me."
Oh,
and we
that's
were At the theater.
Wow.
We're going to the theater, and I said, I don't get it. What's the big deal? Then we realized later on that because I'm half blind, that I couldn't see the 3D movie. So that's the last time I paid for a 3D movie. But yeah, it's something that
So,
I guess you wouldn't know about me.
no, that actually, now that I'm thinking about it, makes a lot of sense because as you were saying that, I was like going through, when we met, and I was like, yeah, you always stood to my left, which means you're right. So you could actually, that's really
Yeah, so
funny.
I keep an eye on you.
Yeah. I mean, did you do that on purpose, or was it just kind of something that just
Oh well,
happens?
when my girlfriend and I are walking down the street, yeah, she always walks on my right side, just so I can
Hmm.
keep an eye on her.
Oh, that's incredible, man. Hey, Pete, this is a lot of fun, man. I'm going to go
Yeah,
ahead and wrap this up. If you don't mind, stay on for just a couple of seconds after I stop, and
yeah, of
we'll
course,
go from there.
man. Yeah,
Pete, hey, fucking pleasure, dude. So good to see
yeah.
you again.
Thank you
Hopefully
so
in
much,
person
Glenn.
soon.
So
All right,
glad
brother.
we've kept all these years. Cheers, man.
Cheers.